Okay, so what we'd like to interesting exercise, isn't it, to share stories? I was able to jump in several of the different rooms, and I really enjoyed the conversation that I was hearing, and I'm sure Amy felt the same way. So what I'd like to do now is go to room one, share a couple of the stories that most resonated with.
I'm an addict. My name is James. So there was some consistency with several different of our areas. And the story was that with regards to disagreement, that really the delegate's job was to carry the area's conscience and to push their own personal views to the side. We did have kind of an interesting story. Kelly, if you want to just sort of fill us in about your situation.
Sure, Kelly Attic. This was just a perspective that I presented that, you know, we as delegates, we think of there's a decision and then we have our personal bias or our personal feeling of a decision. We either agree or disagree. And then there's always the challenge of the ethical challenge of going to the conference with taking a vote that we disagree with. But then there's another aspect, another element that I wasn't really prepared for or hadn't really thought ahead to is when we get asked to be a part of a work group and we invest our time in this work group, in this project that does result into a car motion of how would I feel if my region rejected those motions. And so what that was something I was conscious of, is that, you know, I invested 18 months of my life in time into a work group, into a project that was three car motions in this car. And if my region had voted no, it was going to be difficult, not that like they've just rejected everything that I did. And so that's just something to be aware of, that as delegates, as we get picked on to or invited to be a part of projects, that, and then our delegates that are going to go and take a vote as a result of that project, that there will be some strong feelings associated with that if it goes one way or the other.
Interesting. Thanks so much. Show of hands for room one. Okay, room two. Who'd like to go? No one. Room two. What do you got?
I don't think we're clear on our room numbers.
That'd be
Louis.
Katie.
Hi, I'm an addict named Katie. I think I'm room two. I'm so sorry. I realized that there was a number after the S and I was number two. So here we are. My group did awesome. Good job. I'm actually so the most interesting thing that I learned was that one of our members is from New Delhi, India, and the time difference when it came to amendments was that there was such a time difference from the live action going on in California that there wasn't time to actually consult members or areas or groups or anything when there was an amendment. So the group conscience or the conscience of the region was just given to the delegate without any process of like getting any more input. And I thought that that was very interesting. And also there was different translation processes that would have taken a very long time for any kind of input for an amendment to happen. And I thought that that was very fascinating. And I think that I'm gonna turn it over to someone else in my group to tell some more interesting stuff that happened.
Some of you might remember the service system project and the motions that came up in 2014 at the conference. And of course, our region was very much opposed to them, very vocal. And so we had a conscience on the motions to vote against them, which was easy enough when they came up in the CAT discussion and the car discussions and the voting, until there was an amendment made on the motion to include them in the Guide to World Service as an option. Well, we had never talked about it in our region. We had discussed some things about, compromise. And I thought personally, my region would go for that. So I was like, I'm prepared to vote for the amendment. And then I talked to my AD, and because we do that on things, and he's like, no, we shouldn't vote for it. We had never discussed it in our region. We have a conscience against the services proposal as a whole. What should we do? So it was like, now we have a disagreement between myself and the alternate delegate. And it's like, because we don't agree, I'm like agreeing with him. I'm not going to change our vote or vote in favor of something if I don't have the conscience, at least my own alternate. So my own personal, is just a case where my personal instinct might be to do things one way, you know, in discussions and being at the conference, and it's a fluid situation. I voted against what I thought would be the right decision because I didn't have an agreement for my alternate delegate. That was it. Thank you.
Thanks. I have a story. I was supposed to share this. So at the 2018 conference, a couple of motions became policy, which allowed zonal forums with 2 or more unseated communities to send zonal delegates with voting rights to the World Service Conference. And it was history. So what we did at the Asia Pacific Forum, we have 9 seated communities and 21 unseated, is that we actually virtually met with communities that were as small as a single group. And it was for the first time in their history that they actually had heard of something called CAR. And I remember motions, particularly 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. There were so many questions. And just the story is that the impact that a decision made at the conference actually has on individual addicts is incredible, because you had these people actually participate in this decision-making process, and that conscience was gathered by the ZD and you know, taken virtually to the conference. And I thought that was an incredible thing to see and to actually experience.
Thanks so much. Show of hands for group 2. Chris is group 3.
So for question 1, I'm going to actually ask Tommy from Greater New York to share his experience with developing a conscience by collecting car and cat tallies.
Previous, like in 2018, we went through the whole process of collecting pieces of paper that was sent out with the region, and it was very tedious. I collected each piece of paper, sent to the area, to the region, and then made an Excel spreadsheet with all the votes to come down to 1 vote for each, you know, motion. And so we decided in 2020 to do it online, which was much better. It was a much easier process. We did a literature survey online also. We did call workshops on Zoom. We only got to do, I think, 2 in person, and then we shut down. So we did call workshops on Zoom for a couple of the areas. And it was a much more steadfast process. It was much easier. That's it. It was pretty simple. And
so for question 2, we're going to actually ask Danny, and if there's time, we'll have Gail share also. Go ahead, Danny.
Danny Attic. So in 2016, there was a motion to approve the draft for guiding principles. It was motion number 1. And the Greater New York region had made an amendment to add specific language to change the literature regarding some like historical reference they thought that was miscategorized about the traditions. And in this case, our region didn't know about the amendment prior to going to the conference. And North Carolina is a very strict, you know, we workshopped this for 6 months, and this is how we're voting on it. And now in a different scenario in 2018, a member of our zone was the Florida region, had told us like at the car workshop in December in Charlotte that they were going to present an amendment to motion number 9 made by the Northern New York region, which was regarding the creation of a project plan for a piece of literature on DRT and MAT. And the proposal was to like add language regarding, you know, that the literature be like directed specifically toward how we treat members. Now, since we had that motion way in advance, before we had done any car workshops, we were able to add it to the tally and, you know, sort of gather conscience on it ahead of time.
Thank you. Go ahead, Gail. Can you share about question 2?
Sure. So our region basically gives us a vote of confidence. If we hear any new information, we can change the vote. But most of the time, the new information isn't something that our region would be okay with. I do have one story. During the 2020 conference, the virtual conference, my delegate, I was an AD at the time, and my delegate and I kept texting each other like, what do you think? What do you think? And it was frantic and really difficult to pay attention to, or or keep up, because things change so quickly. But we feel like we did a good job, voting on our region's conscience. But we enjoy the fact that our region has confidence in us that we will carry their voice.
Thank you. Show of hands for table 3, group 3, table 3, or we're going to call it in this new age. Troy, you're up.
Hi, everybody. Addict named Troy. Small group 4, we really just described how the conscious is gathered in our regions. There were Northern New England, South Florida, Connecticut, Mid-Atlantic, and Greater Philadelphia. And so we got to respond to question 1. There was definitely a lot of commonality in how that process unfolds. I think Connecticut was the only dinosaur. Everyone else is actually using the Google form. Not Greater Philadelphia. So there are 2 dinosaurs. And we got to question 2, and for the most part, out of all of the regions that were in the group, they all allowed the RD that vote of confidence in order to, do what they believed was best when handling amendments or new information. And we didn't get an opportunity to get the question 3, just how we did it being, our input.
We got group 5. Rob was the secretary. Thank you. Show of hands.
Hello, everybody. I'm an addict. My name's Rob. Group 5 assigned delegate responsible to bring in the whole report. So this is what we discussed. We had a lot of discussions of how the vote is carried in the 5 RDs that we're discussing. So everyone discussed the importance of having as many workshops as possible before the WSC, to get the information out to the people, whether those workshops were virtual or in person, whether the RD was there or not, but it was all the RDs were making sure there was a lot of workshops. Gathering votes, there was different, during those workshops, they were utilizing not only the resources within the region, but also tapping into the world board members, tapping into nearby regions. So as far as the information, they were gathering out as many resources as they could to make sure that they had many viewpoints on the issues that were being discussed. There's a varied vote gathering. Some of the regions did a group tally. Some of the regions have only RCMs voting at the regional assembly. And some of them have an online survey or a printed survey where the answers get weighted differently. So an area might get weighted differently than a group, and a group might get weighted differently than an individual. And all the votes are cast, and the RDs decide how to gather that and bring it to the world. Most of the regions all agreed that the groups are not interested in voting on anything in the CAT. So there's very little effort of spending time going over the motions concerning the CATs. Most of the RDs have been delegated the right to vote the way they feel, because they feel like they have the most information. And there's also, regions talked about the resolutions when you have close votes. So if it's 55 to 50, well, they want to open up the discussion more to find out, ask the groups like, what's missing here? Where's the gray area? So there's a lot of that, trying to develop the vote, to get behind the vote, to find out why is it so close, until they can get some kind of a consensus. During the conference, when amendments come up, a couple of RDs mentioned that they're on the phone, they're emailing, or they're in contact with other people in the regions, whether it's an RD team or somebody in the region, that something's come up on the floor. So they're not just faced with a decision to make by themselves, which kind of ties into the last point there that one of the RD said he was, able to, not do any self-will run riot and say, I know what's going on here. Just contacted the RD team, and while the conference was going on, this virtual conference just passed, was able to tap into them again and say, hey, look, there's an amendment here. Let's get a conscience on this and formulate it that way. So there wasn't just with one person voting on it. So I think I captured most of the things we talked about. We didn't hit it, like question by question. It was pretty a wide open discussion, but I think we captured all the questions.
All right, thanks, Rob. Show of hands for table group breakout 5.